Here because I've been practicing law for over 25 years, primarily business law, but what that means is you represent employers who are dealing with all types of things. Sometimes an employer is dealing with a situation where, say an employee leaves and they keep your files, or they download information from your computer and they're gone. Or you get a letter from the EEOC. You've just been accused of sexual harassment, discrimination, and if you're like most small to mid-sized businesses, everything you got rides on the business. If the business is gone, you're gone. So I know how it feels when an employer gets hit with one of these situations, and now the question is, how do we keep the business alive? I've also represented a lot of employees who have been fired, and then the only thing they know to do is to go to an attorney to try to figure out a way to undo what has just been done. For the employer of a small business or the employee, I think the effects is the same. For many people, the job represents everything. If you lose the job or you lose the business, it's the same thing. So I'm here to talk to you about some things that we need to keep in mind in order to avoid ever being there. So the first part of my talk will be mostly non-legal things. The second part will be some of the legal things that you need to be aware of. And between the two talks, Tiffany will talk to you about some things you need to be aware of when you're thinking about whether to bring on employees as independent contractors, and the factors that you need to keep in mind with that. Now, I'll start by saying this. We're in a new day now. The millennials, they think differently. They're generally driven by what's going on at the moment. So if they're working and the phone sends a notification that you got a text message, they will normally check that text message right now. Now, when I was a kid, I remember hearing my parents say weird things like, "Do you know so-and-so called me on my job?" And it was a big deal to get a call on the job. And you'd hear them say things like, "You better not call me on the job." Well, that whole concept has changed now. If a person if their job is to put the red widgets in the blue box and the phone rings or the text message goes off, the whole widget in the box thing takes a second seat. And I got to check my phone now. So that's the world that our new employers are now having to deal with. That's who you're hiring. So now we got to figure out better ways to hire and keep good employees. First thing we got to think about is what I call pre-hiring considerations. Before you hire your first employee, or if you've got employees now and you're getting ready to hire your next employee, here's some things you need to be thinking about. First thing is, there's just no substitute for good leadership. And that is leaders who know where the company is going and how we're going to get there, and how do we articulate it in such a way that everybody embraces it and goes in the direction you're going. Think about it. The reason you need employees, perhaps the only reason you need employees, is because you realize that where you're trying to go or what you're trying to do, you can't get there by yourself. You can't do it by yourself. So you got to see yourself as the leader and understand that there is just no substitute for good leadership. If something's going on that you don't think should be going on in the company, the first person to blame is not the employee. First person you got to look at is yourself and ask yourself, am I managing correctly? Am I leading in the way that I should be leading? Now, a lot of people hate when I put this up. You need to be ready, willing, and able to pay fair wages. A lot of times people will take the job. They will say, yes, I'll take the job. But if the compensation is not carefully balanced, how they do the job may be affected by whether or not they're paid well enough. Now, what I tell people is, before I get to this, if you cannot pay fair wages, you need to do the job yourself. And that just means that not in addition to running the company and leading the company, you've got to put the widgets in the box. It is better not to hire the person if you can't pay a fair wage than to hire them and have to manage a person who does not feel like they're being paid fairly, and you know they're not being paid fairly. Now, the next thing is that you need to have a clear vision. I ask owners often, what's the vision for your company? And you don't have to answer this, but think about it. What is the vision for your company? Is there anybody here that's comfortable stating your company's vision?
The vision I have for my firm that in 3 years I want to be a firm of about 3 to 5 people with a run rate of about $1 million a year in professional services sales, and working with small, medium-sized companies in the $10 to $20 million range. And the value that we add to those clients would be help those business owners and leaders achieve their wildest dreams as it relates to their business life and their personal life.
Great. Thank you very much. I ask all business owners, what is the vision of your company? And it really doesn't matter to me what it is, but being able to stand up and articulate it in clear and concise terms is critical. Not just so that you know it, but the more you're able to do that, the more likely you're able to get employees to embrace it. I've learned this in representing lots of small businesses over the years. When I go to visit a client's office or business location, I can almost tell the difference between an environment where the employees don't know the vision and an environment where they do. What they say about their boss, how they cherish their boss, a lot of times is based upon how well the boss does in articulating where we're going. All the way to the point where each employee knows where she fits in. So they know we're heading in this particular direction. We want X amount of customers. We want X amount in terms of cash flow. And each employee knows what role she plays, what role he plays in getting the company there. Having clear vision. Now let's talk a little bit about job descriptions. You want to make sure when you're hiring that you review the job description. You may have, maybe the last person quit or you had to terminate them. So you bring out the old job description that they were working by and you use that as the model for the new employee. You need to look to review it and make sure, one, that it's clear and that it's concise. It needs to be such that anyone who reads it knows not only what to do in their job, but how to be successful. You basically want to set your employees up to succeed. Now, policies and procedures. If you really want to protect your company from bad lawsuits, one of the things you got to constantly be doing is reviewing your policies and procedures. Here's a trick that a good employment lawyer will do. When something bad has happened, they're going to ask you for the policies and procedures. And they're going to ask whoever the supervisor was, the manager, they're going to go down the policy. No, so you have a policy for X. Yes. And if you haven't been following those policies, then they're going to make that as the reason why everything else you've done was just wrong. So you need to be constantly looking back at the policies and procedures to see, are we still doing things this way? If we are, is it fair? But more important than that is, do the employees perceive it as fair? So if you're hearing talk around the water fountain, someone's complaining because they're requiring us to lock the gate when we leave every night. And I don't like that. You may need to have a meeting about why that policy is important. We're trying to protect our property here. We're trying to protect the assets of the company. So we need to make a habit of locking the gate when we leave. And it's a policy here. Is there anybody in here that does not like that policy? Let's talk about it.
Give me a question. Just, policy procedures, you can get really,
yes,
go way down and really granular. So where's kind of the trade-off or the happy ground from a legal perspective?
Very good question. I try not to let my clients get overly wordy and trying to get too deep into the weeds. Guiding principles is what I try to do. I don't know. One of the things I do in my company is I have a list of core values. And they're simple. There's only about 5 of them. And so I try to make sure that everybody knows what the core values are. Do your best. Tell the truth. Use good judgment. If they understand my core values, then I don't have to get too wordy in the policies and procedures. You can get it down to 7 or 8 pages sometimes, and then you manage and supervise it. If you've got a big, thick 3-hole binder of policies and procedures, no one's going to know them. And the only thing that's going to happen is something bad goes wrong, and you turn to page 99 and say, it's our policy that you're supposed to walk with your head up when you walk down this particular hallway. It's not going to make any sense. And when something blows up, you, the owner and the manager, trying to explain it, is just going to make you look like, there's a word that your lawyers use, it's called, the word is called capricious, meaning you just have something, but there's no real rhyme or reason to why it exists. You want to avoid that. Now, the interview. When you get to, once you've done all these what I call pre-hiring thoughts, pre-hiring considerations, you're down now to time to interview the employee. You want to look for skills, meaning you know what skill set you need. But what's more important than the skills is whether you got someone who is ready, willing, and able to perform the job duties. And if you can, look for whether they're ready, willing, and able to do it with passion. Because you can teach someone how to put the blue widgets in the red box, but you can never teach them how and to actually want to do that. So in the interview, you really want to be looking for, do I have someone here who will do this and do it because they want to do it and do it because it's part of their passion? One of the questions that I often ask, or I encourage my clients to ask is, you ask the person, describe for me your most ideal job. What are you doing? And you listen to see what they tell you. When they tell you what they would like to do, then you ask yourself, is that in line with what I'm trying to look for? Now, when I get to talking about the 90-day or 60-day trial period, you're going to want to look for whether their behavior is consistent with what they said they want to do. Okay, a team approach to interviews. I recommend that you have a team approach to interviews because what you may miss, others may catch. And when I say team approach, I'm not necessarily just talking about managers. But if you're hiring someone in the mailroom to fill a position in the mailroom, you may bring in someone who works in the mailroom. And they don't have to be the manager of the mailroom. They could be a mail processor. Here's what happens. Not only are you getting a feeling from what goes on in the mailroom, but the person in the mailroom now feels valued. That I'm a part of the hiring process. And so it's important for me to make sure that we bring on the right type of person, because that may be my coworker. And so they're feeling value, and they're feeling a part of the process. The other thing, I've met some of my clients, they have a practice where if one person on the team says, I don't think this is a good fit, they will not hire that person. So what you're doing is you're building your company based upon not just who you think is good for the company, but who your team feels is a good fit.
Dimitri?
Yes.
May I just real quick? I attended another seminar that you had put on with some similar points on it, and that was something I took back to when I had my concrete business, and we started doing that, and it was amazing. I mean, that one little thing completely changed the culture of my company. People, they felt valued. There were things that I didn't see. Okay, let's come. Okay, you want the job? Okay, fine. And other people, it was absolutely amazing. That's one of the best pieces of information I've ever received. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the comment. When I am in the midst of an ugly lawsuit, whether I'm representing, because I've represented employees and employers, and by the way, you want to try to avoid a lawsuit with everything you got. It is the most ineffective way to use your time and money. And I'm an attorney. Lawyers make a lot of money on litigation, but my heart goes out for my clients when they have to come to me to represent them in a lawsuit, because a lot of things is out of my control. A lot's driven by what the court says and what date we have to file this according to the rules. Or the other lawyer. The lawyer shoots something over, I got to respond to it. So back to your point, Keith. What I have found is that when employees across the board feel a part of the team, it's hard for one employee to stand up and go in a different direction, because they're not just fighting the boss, but they realize that there's a whole company over there who disagrees with me. And a lot of times it's because they were not performing. They were not showing up on time, or they did have a bad attitude and they know it. So you're less likely to be sued if the employee knows that I was wrong and I just need to go find another job. Now, the trial period. I recommend that employers, before you tell the person that you're a permanent employee, you have some trial period, 90 days, 60 days, and you remind them that your job you're an employee at will, meaning basically we're trying you out, and you have a right to leave when you want, but we have a right to let you go when we want. We're on a trial period, and you're letting them know that there's no guarantee. So just because I told you that this is a 90-day period, there's no guarantee that we're gonna make it to the 90 days. Yes.
I thought probationary periods were no longer upheld. So how is this different than a probationary period?
What do you mean no longer upheld?
But the courts, it's no longer a justifiable reason of letting somebody go, because they decided if you terminate them in the first 90 days, that they just weren't a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like TWC won't use it, in my understanding, that lawyers will no longer, that the courts will no longer uphold anybody who was released during what you're calling a trial period.
Upholding as a legitimate
As
termination?
a legitimate reason, that there needs to be something else.
Oh yes, of course.
It's not a magic word.
No, good point. I have always used this little trick. When, let's say you comes to hire me to represent them in wrongful termination case, and you ask the boss, why did you terminate Jim? We had a right to. We can terminate people at will. It's really a bad concept, because you never want to terminate someone just at will. You need to have a reason for it. Because simply to say, I just did it at will, puts you in a very bad light. So I don't want to mislead anyone to thinking that you can just let someone go and it's just at will. You do need to have a reason for doing that. And the other thing, if they go and apply for unemployment. I tell clients that's a business expense, and unless you really had cause, like they stole something or there was something really bad, let them get the unemployment. Because here's what happens from a practical standpoint. You object to the unemployment and they don't get it. The next stop is at a lawyer's office. You will pay your lawyer more defending and dealing with that than you would have if you just let them get the unemployment. You're going to get a higher premium. Okay, you live with it. That's why you do a better job on the hiring side. Before you let them in the door, you do everything you can to screen out the bad ones and screen in the good ones. Training and supervision. After you brought them on, whether you got them in on a trial period or you are permanently hiring them, you need to know that your job hasn't ended. Training and supervision is a full-time job for managers. You really, as an owner, you really have two jobs. One, leading and directing the company, making all the tough decisions, and managing and supervising. A lot of times employers think that, okay, you know your job is to put the blue widgets in the red box. And so you should be able to do that. No, you need to be checking and watching and managing and coaching and supervising all through the process. Never be afraid to encourage good performance. What I'll say about that is a lot of my clients are using personality assessments and various things to learn each of their employees' personalities so that you learn how best to encourage this particular employee. Because some people, if they walk in and you say, how's it going, they think something's wrong. And so some personalities, you ask something as simple as that, man, am I getting fired? Is there something I've done wrong? So you got to learn the personalities. Some people, the opposite is true. If you don't ask how you're doing, oh my, they must be thinking about firing me because no one asks how I'm doing today. So get to know your employees, whether it's doing these assessments or just being mindful that everybody is not motivated in the same way. Some employers think that all of this stuff is just too hard. I'm just going to bring on independent contractors and that way I can just say your contract is terminated, you're out of here, but I'm going to treat them just like an employee. They look, smell, taste like employees, and I'm going to treat them like employees, but I'm going to call them independent contractors.
To his point, a lot of times as small business owners or managers in a small business, it is easy to feel like there's so much information. How in the world do I navigate hiring employees, interview process, firing if there's an issue, dealing with HR problems, the documentation, the files that you have to do. It's just a lot. The key thing that I will throw in here before I get into the details of contractors and employees and some other various pitfalls that employers can fall prey to is to surround yourself by people who are experts in their field, like myself, like Dimitri, HR resources like Lee. There are people that will point you in the right direction. Not any one of us can know all of these things. So make sure that the people that you surround yourself with know these things. So first things first, employees versus contractors. So there are some key points to note here, and I'm actually going to be fairly detailed on this because it's very important that we all understand what the differences are, because exactly what Dimitri said, the problem is, and I run into this on a regular basis with my payroll clients, I'll see that Joe every week on the weekly payroll continues to get paid $500. And every once in a while he's also getting commission, and there was a loan to the company and he's now repaying this loan, right? And so there's all these things that scream that he is an employee, but they're not taking taxes out and they're calling him a contractor. So it looks, smells, feels like an employee, but he's being called a contractor. So I want to talk about these three pieces here, and I'm actually going to read some things specifically off of the IRS regulations because it is that important to understand the differences. So, number one, behavioral. So, does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his job? So, with Joe, do I tell him you've got to be here at 8, you cannot leave until 5, you'll take a 30-minute break in the morning, a 30-minute break in the afternoon, you need to wear the blue shirt, this is Jane Business Solutions on it, and here's your business card. It's going to say you're a contractor, but when you introduce yourself, you're going to say, I'm Joe, I work with Jane Business Solutions. Because that behavior points to an employee, he's an employee, okay? He's not a contractor. Now, the flip side of that is if I say, you know, I've got this work that I need to be done, I've got some analysis on a spreadsheet that I need to be print out, I need it sometime in the next few weeks, do it at your own leisure, you don't have to be in the office to take care of this at all, but here is kind of the end result of what I need. And I'm going to pay you, regardless of how many hours you work, I'm going to pay you $600 for this work. Well, that is contractor. And the problem is that there can be some gray area within those two. And so again, it goes back to having someone ask those proper questions, because what will happen is if Joe loses his job because I tell him, look, you're showing up late every day, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, instead of wearing the blue shirt, you're wearing a t-shirt with a bunch of holes in it, you're not representing my business the way I want you to, please don't come back. And then Joe's girlfriend says, what do you mean you don't have a job anymore and you're not going to be helping me pay the bills and I need to give you money now? This isn't going to work. So then Joe calls the Texas Workforce Commission and says, so I was called a contractor, but I think I might should have been called an employee. I should be getting an employment. They start asking Joe all of these questions, and then the next thing you know, you're going to get a call from the Texas Workforce Commission. You owe a lot of back payroll taxes, and they don't give you a week or a month or a year to pay those off. They say, I need for you to get us the money today. And then you've got a cash flow issue, and so it creates a lot of problems. So you want to avoid those gray areas. Second one, financial. Again, I'm going to read this because it's important. Are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? These include things like how the worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, and who provides tools, supplies, etc. So if you are providing a laptop, if you're reimbursing supplies, if they're having to buy out of pocket, things like that, it points to employee versus contractor. And then the third is the type of relationship. Are there written contracts or employee-type benefits, i.e. pension plan, insurance, vacation pay, etc.? Will the relationship continue, and is the work performed a key aspect of the business? So these are three very important things that it's important to grasp when you're trying to differentiate between employees and contractors.
That's a good question. So can you still, for like identification, so I come from the construction world where, so on this site, you know, hey, you need to wear this shirt that says my company because it's important. But as far as your tools are all your own, you know, and the job site's open from this to this, and your deadline is here. Is that a gray area, or is?
Yeah, so sometimes we muddy waters that don't necessarily need to be muddied.
Yeah.
So there are things that you can do. Like one thing I would recommend not doing is giving them a t-shirt with your logo on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having their own tools, kind of giving them parameters to get the job done, but giving them some flexibility on when they arrive. There are definitely certain things that you can do that make it that much clearer. Because if the TWC comes back and says, well, it is a gray area, you've got to recognize that they're looking for revenue.
Right.
So they're going to err on that person being an employee. They're not going to say, well, it was kind of great, let's just call them a contractor. No, they're going to want to err on the revenue piece. So you want to do everything that you can as an employer to make sure that you make it as clear as possible.
One of the things we say, especially in the construction business, is if that worker can leave your job for 2 days to go do side work and it's okay with you,
Right.
then he's a contractor. Not okay with that, then you're an employee.
Right.
You got
That's
upset with
exactly
that?
right.
You're an employee.
That's exactly right. And I was talking to someone. It's been a couple months or so ago now, and they install gutters, and everyone's contractors. And we were talking through it, and I was asking him some questions, probably very similar to questions that the TWC would ask. And he said, "Well, but everybody in our industry calls them contractors. This is normal in our industry." And my response was, just because everybody else in the industry is doing it does not mean that you should, because the problem is they may not go to everybody else in your area, in your industry, in your town. They may just go to you, and if they come back and say, over the last 3 years, you owe us $100,000, do you have that to pay them? And the problem is with small businesses, that is crippling, if not putting small businesses just out of business altogether, because they just don't have the money. So it's a whole lot easier to do things right the first time, rather than having to go back and make a lot of corrections, because then you're paying people like Dimitri to get you out of trouble. You're paying me to go back and amend and create payroll tax forms, and it ends up creating thousands of extra dollars even beyond the payroll tax piece of it, the expense, that you probably don't have. And if you do have, you're not really wanting to put it on that. You're wanting to maybe buy additional assets and build and maybe hire some additional headcount or whatever that is to grow your business. So how do you prevent these future issues? So there's a few key things here, and some of these are in line with what Dimitri said a minute ago. But the biggest thing that you can do is, from the very beginning, make sure that they're correctly classified. Do your due diligence, ask right questions, hire someone like myself or Dimitri, or just make a phone call. I mean, I don't have a problem with phone calls. Say, hey, what do you think? I'm looking at this person and I'm trying to figure out how to classify them. How should I do this? Because most people are going to be willing to answer those questions and help you out if you'll just ask before you go down that road. So make sure they're correctly classified at the beginning. Make sure you're thoroughly interviewing them. Make sure that you're doing, like Dimitri said, the hiring process. Do your due diligence. Slow to hire, quick to fire. So if they're not working out, you've got the documentation to do that. Don't hang someone, don't keep someone just because you made a bad decision in the beginning, but you've got to have that documentation as well. If you'll hire correctly in the very beginning, you won't even have to go down that road. So ask the right questions. Make sure you have documentation within that trial piece that if they are not happy in it, that this is what I expect. Here are the bullet points for the things that you are going to need to do in your first 90 days to continue being employed with me. And then communicating those things. A lot of this can be done by just planning, preparing, doing things up front rather than being reactive. Being reactive is never going to be best case scenario for you as an employer. And worst case, if they don't work out, what are you going to do? So what is your plan? So sometimes you hire people and they just don't work. For whatever reason, it just doesn't work. What's your plan? And if you have a game plan on how you're going to have an extra strategy, then you'll know how to implement that when that happens. So another pitfall, once you determine whether contractors, whether they're employees, your employee wages. The other thing that I find that is very common is there's a couple of things. You have exempt versus non-exempt employees, which then also kind of tags into overtime rules and laws. And we just went through a lot of this regulation just a few months ago on the overtime laws. But a lot of people don't realize that just because you call someone salaried, just because you say, I'm going to pay you $600 a week, doesn't mean that they really should be a salaried employee. They might very well should be hourly. They might very well should be paid overtime if they're working more than 40 hours a week. And so it's important to understand the difference between salaried and hourly employees, which non-exempt is essentially an hourly employee. It's a salary they're eligible for overtime. So do they get paid overtime? Salaried employees can be paid overtime, so you gotta know the difference there. And then here's the big one here. So overtime at minimum wage exempts positions, which are administrative, executive, professional, and outside sales. They have to make at least $455 a week to fit into that exempt category to not be paid minimum wage. So there are a lot of details in here that you want to make sure people are categorized properly, paid properly, that sort of thing. And again, what you end up having an issue with is the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Department of Labor, Texas Workforce Commission, and what we're trying to do is make sure that you don't fall into traps because of regulations and laws. And so you have to make sure that people are categorized properly.
Can you write in a contract that salary is this with more than 40 hours a week? So if you said your salary is X at 60 hours a week, does that change the overtime laws if that's what their contract is?
So the overtime laws, if you are truly a salaried employee, so for instance, a professional. So my background is CPA controller. I was always salaried professional. I was not paid overtime, so I was in the exempt category. And it was always reflected of, essentially you were required to work whatever hours were necessary to get the job done. Because I fell into that exempt category, those overtime hours are not required. Now, the caveat there is that they had to pay me at least $455 a week to make sure that I also met the income, because that ends up equating to at 40 hours, $11 and some change per hour, because you got to make more than minimum wage. So they can't pay me a weekly wage as an exempt employee and bring it below that $455. So if I'm equating to like $6 an hour on my weekly wage, then I'm really an hourly employee. I'm not exempt. I'm not really an exempt employee. So there's a lot of different things in there. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so what are the solutions then on these traps? Have professionals on your team. You know, your insurance is having experts that know the rules, know the regulations, know where to find the answers, and can help make sure that you're not going to fall into those traps.
If you get into the gray area, like what Keith just asked, what if I want to hire someone and I want them to be exempt? My recommendation is, if you're in a gray area, always err on the side that gives you the protection that you need. Because you will pay more when you hire me and Tiffany to fix it than you would have had you just erred on the side that protects you. First thing I want to say about the legal issues is there are no real winners. If you get in a situation where you get a letter from EEOC or a letter from TWC, or you may get a letter from a lawyer, by the way, that's generally how it comes up. You're doing your job and all of a sudden you get a certified letter from a lawyer or EEOC. If it's a lawyer, it's probably a demand letter. You just wrongfully terminated Jim, and therefore we're asking for this big dollar figure, and if you don't pay it by a certain date, we're going to do these things. What normally happens when the clients that I've experienced, when that happens, they get mad. How dare Joe do this to me? I've treated Joe well. Joe knows that he's a bad guy, and you get mad. A lot of times, first thing you do, you throw it in another stack. You're busy. You're heading out of town. I can't deal with this right now. Don't do that. Give yourself a moment. My partner calls it getting over being mad. So take some time to take a deep breath, but you need to deal with it. The best thing to do is call a professional in, your lawyer, and that way you take the time to develop a strategy. I had a situation a few months ago where the TWC was after a client of mine over one situation was payroll, the other situation was some discrimination issues. You got to respond to that stuff. And if you take your time with the right professional, because here's the real value that I add when I come into a situation like, I'll ask you the tough questions. What was your policy on this? And sometimes it was a bad policy, or it just was no policy at all. But we're going to deal with it, so by the time we respond to the TWC, we will be able to state what happened from the company's perspective in a way that's been tested, because you can be sure that a good lawyer will have thought about, now if we say it this way, what are all the kinds of things that the TWC or EEOC will say to challenge this. When I had one about a month ago, we did such a good job that the investigator called us and told us, this is a closed case. I'm going to tell you now what I'm going to write up in my report. There's no claims here in close the case, but we worked hard. I made the client tell me, what were you thinking about when you made this decision? How do you treat your, in this case it had to do with alleged discrimination at an apartment complex. How do you treat all your tenants? Does everybody get a certain amount of days of notice to cure the rent? And I wanted to see the file on each one of those because I knew those are the kinds of questions that, in this case, TWC would ask. A lot of times employers want to hide their heads in the sand. They don't want to deal with that. And before you know it, tomorrow is the day to respond, and you just throw something together and respond, and before you know it, it's hard to undo something once it's already been done. But you need to realize that there's no real winners. The only thing you can do when you get there, when it becomes a legal issue, is to cut your losses. The employment at will policy, you have a right, unless you have an employment contract with that person, to hire and fire at will. But with one caveat, you need to have good reason, whatever action you're taking. So it's not necessarily at will in the way that it sounds. But what you let your employees know is that the only way this company is going to be successful is everybody has to be doing their best. And so if I, the owner and the manager here, if I'm not doing my best, we will fail. But guess what? Each and every one of you have to feel the same way. I need the best from everybody. Normally when an employee wants to sue you, normally it's going to come up in the area of discrimination or sexual harassment. Now, discrimination is a very broad concept. It could be racial, it could be gender, it could be disability, it could be religious, but it's usually in one of those categories, or it's sexual harassment, and that's another broad claim. Here's a lot of times where it comes up. You have to let someone go, and they really don't want to lose their job. Then they remember. I remember when Joe asked me to stay late one night, and I told him I can't work late tonight, and he got mad. And ever since that day, he's been treating me badly. So you want to make sure that when you get these kind of claims, don't get mad or don't stay mad. Deal with it. Respond to it and address it. Now, I'll tell you what will save the day for you if you always keep this in mind. No matter whether the claim is legitimate or illegitimate, employees generally function on a fundamental idea of fairness. And so if something goes wrong and you have to fire somebody, before you make the termination decision, ask yourself, have I been fundamentally fair to this person? Have I treated this person fairly? That's usually what people are thinking about when they're dealing with the issue of being terminated. It's a scary thing for an employee when they're fired. A lot of times it's going home and looking your wife in the eyes or looking your husband in the eyes and saying, I just lost my job. And then the questions go, well, what happened? If you were terminated legitimately and it was fundamentally fair, most people will go ahead and try to find another job. Or good lawyers will recommend to them, you need to try to find another job. The best defense is not to be there. And what that basically means is if you do your best in the hiring process, meaning you're making sure that the people you bring on are people who are the best fit for your company, that's the best defense. These people will generally not be the kind of people who you're going to find yourself in a lawsuit. And I'll say as a closing point, where I got a lot of these thoughts were, in many situations, client hires me, and at some point I go and visit the company. I've noticed that when I walk in with the company, with the owner, and when employees have a passion for their job, and they really like their boss, and they feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, I have fewer calls from that person, if any, about issues about employee problems. But when I go to a job site and everybody just feels to be like they're just a warm body that's filling orders, those are situations that concern me when I get the call and they're saying that Lisa, we fired her, and now she's saying that John made a pass at her. Yes.
Some of the things that you observe or don't observe when you walk into those offices that categorizes if it's an engaged population or an unengaged population.
Sorry.
You're saying when you walk into these offices,
Yes.
that the ones that have passion, so the
Yes.
engaged population, how is it that they react when you walk
Okay,
in
good.
that is different than
You-
an unengaged population?
A few weeks ago, I went to a client's office. We were going to have lunch. So I walked in, I'm waiting for the client, and first thing I hear is employees mentioning things that I did for the company that was good for the company. In this case, we just got a trademark, a difficult situation where we were trying to get a trademark. The employees knew the details. I normally talk to the president, dealing with the president, but the employees knew what it looked like when they finally got their trademark certificate. And they're saying, you're the guy that helped us do that. And I knew that the employer had to have been engaging with them on, because this process took about 6 months. And so when I hear employees talking about things that I know the conclusion of, I know that the employer has been engaged with them and have been giving.
Transparent.
Yes,
And there's
yes.
a lot of information.
Yes, and so they know where the company's going. And in this case, a trademark is part of what we're doing to build the brand and to go in a certain direction. So I knew that they knew the vision of the company. Maybe the boss didn't tell them the whole story, but I knew that I was engaged to get the company to go in a particular direction. And now I'm hearing the employees articulate that vision as though it's their vision, and as though they're part of getting it to where it needs to go. If I could give you one bit of advice, if you can figure out a way to do that on a daily basis, where every day you're walking in and you're saying things and doing things that paint the picture of who you are and where you're headed and why everybody in here is important for that process, the likelihood that something bad is going to happen in terms of your relationship with your employees goes way down.